Hey, it's Maximo and welcome to Maximo's Travels. It's day 4 of our ultimate Canadian Rockies trip. We drive from Canmore to the Lake Louise Inn, where we have some great coffees and cakes before catching our Fairmont Limousine tour of Lake Louise and Moraine Lake. We explore Moraine Lake in freezing temperatures. We also experience our first proper snow in our trip. We then explore the equally frigid Lake Louise. We try and keep warm by walking around its shore and checking out the lake from different vantage points. We then head back to Canmore and have a very hearty dinner in an English-style pub. Join me. This is a day that we've really been looking forward to. We get to visit Moraine Lake and Lake Louise, two of the sparkling jewels of Banff National Park in the Canadian Rockies. It was actually quite difficult to plan the logistics of how to get to these two lakes, and we're very happy that all the planning and effort came to a stunning fruition. And speaking of planning, a lot of time, effort and planning was spent in making this a perfect trip. If you're interested in following my itinerary, I have produced a one-page PDF of my itinerary that's available for free download from my Buy Me a Coffee storefront. Click on the QR code on the screen or use the link in the description. I've also created a paid 11-page detailed ultimate itinerary for the Canadian Rockies. It's an 8-day self-drive trip that includes tips and tricks, how to get there, accommodation, distances, maps. It's a fantastic guide that will save you time and effort in planning your perfect Canadian Rocky itinerary. We set off from Canmore just before 9 a.m. Our destination was the Lake Louise Inn, the home of the Fairmont Limousine tour that we were going to take at 11 a.m. It was an 80-kilometre journey that was to take around about 1 hour. It's quite difficult and challenging trying to book your visit to Lake Louise and Moraine Lake. There's a number of reasons for this. One, those two attractions are hugely popular. Due to the high demand, visiting these two lakes requires a fair bit of planning. The parking lots fill up before sunrise and they remain full until sunset. So driving here really isn't an option. And if you want to visit Moraine Lake, the road is closed to all private vehicles. The only way to get to both Lake Louise and Moraine Lake is to book a Parks Canada shuttle bus. Unfortunately, when we tried to book these shuttles about a month before we left, there were no spots available. Our only option was to book a private tour. Much more expensive, but at least we got to go. I just couldn't imagine coming all the way to Banff National Park and not going to Lake Louise and Moraine Lake. It'd be unimaginable. We drove on to Lake Louise. As we drove on, we got higher and seemingly the weather got worse and worse. We got some rain and a little flurry of snow or two. Lake Louise sits at an elevation of 1,600 metres, while Moraine Lake sits at 1,884 metres. It makes these lakes very much mountain lakes with quite changeable weather conditions, especially early in June that we were travelling. And to put that into context, Mount Buller in the Australian Alps sits at around 1,800 metres, and it's a place that I used to go snow skiing every year. It was a wonderful, relaxing drive, and we admired the scenery. Before too long, we reached the Lake Louise Inn and slowly found a spot in its voluminous car park. I was quite surprised at how nice and large the Lake Louise Inn appeared to be. In hindsight, we should have checked out of our accommodation in Canmore and driven here and spent one night here. It would have saved us the 80-kilometre trip back to Canmore and then 80 kilometres back past the Lake Louise Inn the next day. The inn even had a fairly luxurious indoor swimming pool, as well as a small Starbucks just off the main lobby and a fairly large and inviting restaurant. We got there with at least an hour to spare, so we decided to go into the restaurant and have a cake and a coffee.
Nice and warm. Nice.
The cake and the coffees were great. It was about 10:45 and we had 15 minutes before our scheduled departure. We checked in at the little tent that's by the side of the car park and jumped into our Fairview Limousines minibus. This cost $64 Canadian per person for a 4.5 hour tour, and I thought it was pretty good value for money. Thankfully, the bus was both four-wheel drive and delightfully warm. It was only about 4 degrees Celsius in the ambient temperature outside. Our first stop was Moraine Lake, situated 1,884 metres above sea level. The higher we got, the colder it got, and it even started snowing a little bit. It took half an hour to reach the lake. Lake Moraine had only been open for a couple of days by the time that we got there. We parked in the car park and walked along the snowy path to the rock piles, a nice mound of rocks that overlooks Moraine Lake, offering spectacular views of the lake and its surrounding mountains. Moraine Lake is a natural lake. It was formed tens of thousands of years ago by glaciers dumping rocks and forming a natural dam. The rock pile is one such big lump of rocks carried by the glaciers and dumped in the valley that was gouged out by the glacier. These rock piles are called moraines. That's how Moraine Lake got its name. The rock pile is approximately 40 metres high. It offers spectacular views of Moraine Lake and the mountains and glaciers that surround it. Because it was so early in the season, the lake was still mostly frozen. That didn't prevent us seeing the turquoise blue colour of the lake. The lake is this colour because of the suspended particles of rock and sand that are suspended in the water as a result of the glacier crushing and grinding all the glacial rocks into these fine particles. Sunlight hits these particles suspended in the water, scattering the light and making the lake appear a bluish colour. The rock piles is a perfect vantage point to take pictures and videos of the lake, and it's one of the most photographed places in all of Canada. It was frightfully cold and we're glad that we rugged up. We'd bought our heavy jackets, beanies, scarves, gloves and thermal underwear, and we really needed them as the temperature ranged between -1 and 1 degree Celsius. Oh, it just started snowing. I'm mighty cold, I can tell you that. It's a pity we weren't there later in the season because this would have been the view that we would have got with the lake fully melted. We spent around half an hour just walking around the rock pile. We finished with the rock pile and made our way to Moraine Lake and walked along its frozen shore. We spent about an hour and a half in Moraine Lake. It had started to snow and we were thoroughly frozen. We were thankful to get back into bus and head towards Lake Louise. Now I could see why they banned private cars from coming up here. Given treacherous weather conditions, the roads can be quite icy and dangerous. There was still a fair bit of snow by the side of the road the day that we visited. After a 20-minute drive, our minibus arrived at the Lake Louise car park. Unfortunately, it wasn't any warmer than Moraine Lake. And what surprised me was that some people were totally unprepared for the conditions. People were there in shorts, t-shirts and flip-flops in -1 Celsius with a biting wind. We were fortunate that Lake Louise was fully melted. However, slightly unlucky in that we didn't get to see the deep turquoise colour that the lake is famed for. At least we got broody and melodramatic shots, however. The sun did manage to poke through the clouds, and this is probably the best pictures that we got. It was still snowing. We had about an hour and 3/4 here at Lake Louise. There were a lot of people here and it was quite chilly, but we had a fabulous time nevertheless. The Fairview Limousine tour that we took was absolutely fantastic. Our tour guide was just a local and so knowledgeable. It was just a fantastic tour. I would highly recommend it. Snowing. And just like that, our tour was over. We were dropped back at the Lake Louise Inn, hopped in our car and drove back to Canmore. It was an absolutely fabulous, if cold, day of touring around Banff National Park. It is certainly one of the highlights of our time in the Canadian Rockies. And I'd also highly recommend the Fairview Limousine tour that we were on.
Later that night.
It was a pretty full day touring and driving. We got back to our accommodation in Canmore and decided to go to the Georgetown Inn Pub. This is only a couple hundred metres away from where we were staying. It did look quite inviting, both inside and out. It was quite a large pub, decorated in the style of an English pub. I was surprised at how many people were there, considering it was a Wednesday night. I ordered a local IPA and it was very, very nice, I can tell you. Jo got stuck into her customary gin and tonic. We both really liked the vibe of this pub. It did remind Jo of England. What have you got there, Jo?
This vegetable curry.
That's the biggest curry I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, no, it's not.
It is huge. And I had
with a mountain burger.
Yeah, well, it's a triple. I think it was a triple peak. It looks pretty high. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. With chips, that is. It's a good thing I'm hungry. Both the dinner and drinks were absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend the Georgetown Inn Pub if you're staying in Canmore. We had an absolutely fantastic time visiting Moraine Lake and Lake Louise. I think it was a highlight of our trip to Banff National Park and the Canadian Rockies. I do hope you've liked this video. If so, please hit that like and subscribe button and hit that notify bell so you'll be notified of all my future videos. If you'd like to support my channel, please consider buying me a coffee. Until our next episode, day 5 from the Canadian Rockies, you take care and bye now.